Recently, I have been talking and sharing about either being avoidant, conflict avoidant, or being too attached. I talked previously in a podcast episode on different attachment styles. And I want to continue with that theme today because where I'm wanting to go with this podcast for a little while is on how to create more meaningful relationships. We all struggle with having fulfilling, meaningful relationships, whether that be with our children, our parents, or our significant other, our best friends. It could be our coworkers. We are relating every single day. And if we aren't in a place where we can create meaningful connections, we will feel miserable. Far too often in our relationships, we are either too avoidant or too attached and enmeshed. I want to share with you what I wrote in my book, Free to Be A Pathway to Inner Liberation, to help highlight this point. So, in order to have meaningful relationships, it's important to learn how to be independent. Too often, we are either too attached or too avoidant, both of which can leave us feeling miserable and empty. Relationships help to remind us that if we're either too commingled or too separate, we can't deeply relate heart to heart. And that's what we are all longing for, is to connect heart to heart. We are all wired to have this desire to connect with other people, to feel seen, to feel heard, to really connect from that heart to heart rather than just from this place of anxiety, fear, scarcity, wearing masks, talking about the weather. You most likely have those types of relationships where it is just kept on the surface level. And that's fine. With some people, we are going to just keep them in our outer circles, and our conversations may just be on the surface. But for those that are close to us and on our inner circle, what we desire is to have that real close connection, that ability to be vulnerable and intimate. So I go on to share in my book, Free to Be, that when my husband and I first met, I don't have to read this part, I can just share with you this part of my life. When I first met my husband when I was in my early 20s, he was the classic knight in shining armor, showering me with all kinds of attention, buying me flowers, treating me like a princess, treating me like a queen. And we were for sure on that honeymoon phase. This was actually something very new for me. I wasn't used to having this type of attention from a guy. So when he was giving it to me, I craved it. I became attached to it. Of course, this was all happening subconsciously. I wasn't even fully aware that I was becoming attached to wanting that external validation. Now, in hindsight, I can see it because, as I've shared so many times on this, I developed perfectionistic and people pleasing tendencies because I was always trying to attain external validation through my grades, through achievements in sports, through being president of the junior class, and just getting all kinds of external validation. I did become attached to that. And that was a driver for me for most of my life. When I was getting this type of attention in those early days, from my husband, it was an endorphin hit and I just wanted more and more. Then as life settled in and we got married and that honeymoon phase wore off. He no longer really needed to be the knight in shining armor because we were married now. And as any normal couple would settle into a pattern, some of that extra attention started to go by the wayside. And when I didn't get that or receive that, I became kind of like clingy, needy for it, and would show up in very unhealthy and unconscious ways. I would almost pout at times or say, why, why don't you do this anymore? Why don't you do that anymore? And when I wasn't getting it, I wasn't feeling that I was worthy because I still at this point had unworthiness issues. I grew up believing and feeling that I wasn't enough unless I was perfecting, performing, and pleasing. That was my pattern. And so now here I'm like, okay, I'm not getting this attention, the adoration, the compliments, the, oh, I love you so much. And I'm so glad we're together. That wasn't happening as often. I started to feel empty within. The void was being kicked up, the wound was being triggered within me. And my way of reacting to his actions was to become avoidant. I would shut down and withdraw. I laugh about it now. It's not funny because it caused a lot of misery, but it's a behavior and a pattern that I learned really well from my mom and dad both. When they were reactive, they both could go into a withdrawal and a avoidant type of place. So the other thing I want to bring up is this. You may be in this situation yourself, or you may know of someone who is in this situation where they respond or react this way, which is that if you're an adult, a parent like me, and you have children that are in their teen years or even their young adult years, 20s, early 20s, I caution you to be aware of watching out for these patterns in your children and perhaps have conversations with them or help them to see that this might be at play, which is the being overly attached, right? So if you overly attached or even enmeshed. So what it might look like is if your child or you are dependent on the other person in your life, your partner, your spouse, even a friend showing up in a particular way, you start to spend less and less time with friends because you're spending more and more time with your partner, for example, and you make all of your decisions based on what your partner thinks, what your partner wants. You start to choose restaurants that your partner wants to go to, or if your partner's in a bad mood, then maybe you're in a bad mood. I'll talk about the standpoint of being a parent right now, because I, for sure, have been enmeshed with my kids and can still, when I'm not being mindful, be enmeshed, which means enmeshment is that you are intertwined, or as I use the word, co-mingled in every part of their lives, their decisions, and everything that's going on. You're involved in it. If they make a bad decision about something, then you feel the effects of it. Or if they're not happy, you're unhappy. And this is very common for a lot of moms to be in this position of feeling mm, the emotions or feelings of your kids. Some of that is just normal, and some of it can be enmeshment. So, what we want to achieve in all of our relationships is being independent. For example, whether you're married or your child is dating, is to have a life of your own where you take care of yourself, you do the things that you want to do, things that excite you. Not everything is about what the other person wants to do. And you're not showing up in a way that you are afraid to disappoint another. So you just do what they want to do and you say what they want you to say. You are being dependent on that approval. You're dependent on the other person to be a certain way.
Hey, it's Kim here, interrupting your regularly scheduled podcast episode to let you know about an opportunity to go deeper into this work. I invite you to head over to Amazon.com and pick up your copy of my book, Free to Be: A Pathway to Inner Liberation. If you are looking to unhook from people pleasing and perfectionistic patterns, if you're looking to have a better way of identifying your patterns and then how you can unhook so you can be free to step outside your comfort zone, free to have more meaningful relationships in your life, free to be your true self without hiding behind a mask any longer. If you desire any of this, then I encourage you to pick up your copy. And if you enjoy my book as much as I loved writing it, please go on over and leave a review on Amazon. You can leave a star review or written review. Now back to your regularly scheduled podcast episode.
Now, the other thing that can happen that happened for me in my relationship early on when I wasn't getting the knight in shining armor and I wasn't getting all of that attention, besides the withdrawing and shutting down, what I often would try to do is do things or say things to try to get him to change, or even my kids, trying to control the other so that they show up in the way that you want them to show up. At the end of the day, this is still dependence because you're dependent on them being a certain way. Unless each person can be themselves and be independent, it's going to be very difficult to have a healthy relationship. This also plays like hand in glove to what Mel Robbins wrote about in her book, The Let Them Theory. Let them is basically saying you allow other people to be themselves. You let them be who they are and you don't try to change them. And that is helpful in terms of trying to create a more meaningful relationship. Now, you might say, well, okay, Kim, that's all well and good, but what about when my kids are acting in this way or my spouse is acting in this way? How am I supposed to just let them and still feel close and connected? That's where the rubber meets the road because the only thing you can really work on or control is you. The other half of the theory that Mel Robbins writes about in her book is called Let Me. And Let Me is where you can be empowered. It's where you have the control to do a whole bunch of things. So for me, what I had to do over the last 25 years so that I could feel more secure within myself was to heal the parts of me that were wounded that allowed me to show up in a space where I was too attached. I needed or craved. Need is a key word when we're talking about dependence, because if you need your partner, your boyfriend, to call you all the time or to show up in a certain way, to be sweet and tender and kind with you when you need it most, and you expect them to read your mind and know that you are feeling vulnerable, and then they show up like, oh, how can I be there for you? Like, you need these things to happen and they're not happening, and you're becoming dependent on the other person to fulfill or take care of all of your needs. There, realistically, there's not one single person out there that can meet all of your needs. It's just not fair to the other person, number one. And it's not possible for you to have one single person that can meet all of your needs. If you're listening to this and you're like, I do have that person, then by all means, I'm happy for you. I would ask you to really examine and make sure that the relationship is healthy and there's interdependence and not dependence. And even if a person can show up for you in all the ways, are you able to show up for yourself? That's really the root of all of the work that I do. And it's the antidote to all of the things that we struggle with when it comes to having unfulfilling relationships or having dependence is being able to do the work to heal yourself and heal the pain from your childhood, heal your traumas so that you can come into wholeness. And when you come from that place, then you feel strong from within. You have unwavering, unshakable confidence that who you are is enough. That's what the outcome is. That's the end goal. That's the paradise. The prison, quote unquote, is living in fear of lack and scarcity, depending on another, and behaving from patterns and your wounds. This is everything that I write about and talk about in my book. And so the key is how you get from this prison to paradise. You're saying to me, Kim, I want more meaningful relationships. I want to have those heart to heart conversations. I want to be able to be vulnerable. I want to have intimacy. I want to be able to show up as my true, authentic self with others. Okay, I hear you, right? So that's amazing. That's the paradise. It's not easy work. I was just recently working with a client and we were talking about this work is hard work. You have to work on it and yourself every single day. It is something that has to be worked on, and it's a practice and it's something that you cultivate. What I will say is, while it is hard, the results, the transformation, the shift is long lasting. Once you know what you know, you can't unknow it and you will have healed. Now, does that mean you will be perfect and you will never have your pattern show up again? Absolutely not. I have been doing this work for a long time and I still have my patterns show up from time to time. They show up every day. If I'm going to be 100% honest, they can show up every day. The difference is this: when they show up, I am aware of them much quicker. Oftentimes, it just takes me minutes to tap in, go inward, and then do what I need to do to shift away from the pattern. A lot of my patterns have actually healed, and they can for you as well. A lot of your childhood wounds can heal and not continue to wreak havoc in your life. There probably are going to continue to be a core three or four of them that may continue to show up that need extra healing and extra work. But nonetheless, the idea is that if you want to have more meaningful relationships in your life and you don't want to show up with people from a place of dependence, and you want to have the freedom to be independent in your relationships, and you want your other person, again, whether it's your mom or your dad, if it's your partner, if it's a best friend, if it's your child, your adult child or teenage child, you want each of you to have independence, autonomy over your own life. What I see over and over again is how many of us fall into the pattern of dependence because of the wounding that we have, the insecurity that we have as a result of particular pain, trauma from our childhoods. We carry out these patterns that keep showing up, which can be avoidant, as I talked about, conflict avoidant, or enmeshed caretaking. If you're trying to take care of everyone and everything, like, have you ever noticed if you're in a room with your family and there's some conflict, the conversation is escalating, do you feel this urge or this pull to have to manage it for everyone? Worry about what this one's thinking. What is this one feeling? Oh, what if he says this to her and it upsets her and she feels ashamed and it has an impact? Like, I used to feel this way and do this all the time with the way that my husband would talk to our kids. Still can still try to seep in there and manage and caretake. And all that does, to some extent, is really clip my kids' wings because they don't learn how to stand up for themselves. Now, mind you, there will be times where what a person is saying or doing is super harmful and dangerous. And it could be, if it's physical, of course, you have to referee, you have to intercept, and you have to intervene and shut it down. I'm not talking about those situations. I'm just talking about back and forth banter. And so that's another example of how you can show up with a pattern of caretaking, managing, fixing, rescuing, enmeshment, too attached or too avoidant, all of which are just patterns that will get in the way of you having meaningful connections. So, what again is the antidote? The thing that you can do is the healing work. The very first thing you have to do is become aware of the patterns. You have to be aware of what's even happening. Listening to my podcast will help you become aware. Working with a coach, you can work with me, or anyone can help you to become aware of your patterns. And then the next step is to take ownership. You have to take ownership of the fact that you are the only one that can do anything to change your patterns, to heal your pain, to heal your wounds. And then the next two steps, what I'm laying out for you is my 5-step power pathway. Step 3 and 4 are where you do the real work. That's where you heal. That is where you heal the wound that was caused in your childhood, that caused you to create the pattern that led to you playing out these particular patterns or behaviors or tendencies, so that you no longer feel that you have to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. So if you want something different in your relationships, you want to show up differently with the people that you love, then you have to do something different in order to have that happen. And then finally, the last thing that you would do is to actually take some action steps where you would practice setting boundaries. You would practice showing up differently. You would catch yourself when you're about to rescue or manage or caretake, or you're feeling this excessive need to attach, like, oh, I have to be with my boyfriend, or he hasn't called me in a couple of days and I'm freaking out. You catch those behaviors and patterns, and then you do the inner work, soothe yourself, regulate your nervous system. There's so much work that can be done, heal these patterns so that you can unhook from them. If you're having questions after listening to this episode, or you have comments, you want to know more, if you are watching this on YouTube, I invite you to subscribe and leave a comment. I'd be happy to respond. If you're listening on your audio platform, you could leave a star review, but you can if you have questions, if you have comments, you want to know more, you want to go deeper, because I'm just scratching the surface. There's so much more to this. You can reach out to me via email, kim@kimgrosscoaching.com. Go to my website, kimgrosscoaching.com. You can book a call and we can see if we're a good fit for each other. And of course, you can grab a copy of my book that will help to lay all this out for you. I just really want to say I appreciate you listening. If you're new to my podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. If you are a person who has people pleasing or perfectionistic tendencies, you find it hard to be your true self, you're wearing a mask and showing up with a mask with other people, you are in the right place. I appreciate you being here.
Hey, Kim Gross here. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Masks Off for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. I invite you to hop on over to my website, kimgrosscoaching.com. Right there on the front page, there's a quiz for people pleasers and perfectionists. You can find out if you have tendencies. You can also get into my newsletter where you will be given valuable content every week on different topics I share here in the podcast. And if you really did enjoy this episode, if you found it helpful, if you found it valuable, please go to, if you're on YouTube, go and subscribe. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, then I invite you to leave a review. You can even do a star review. It doesn't have to be a written review. If you know of someone who can benefit from this podcast or this particular episode, please share it with them. I'll see you next time.